right. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, and we have a special edition of Master Motivation today. And I could probably give about 100 things to describe this man, but the most important thing is this is my very first instructor from 1985, Grandmaster Dennis Ichikawa. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking time to talk.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure for me to be here today.
You know, many of my students will watch this. People that are in the martial arts industry, our alliance, they're really going to love watching this. And I know that you already had a chance to be on the Real Talk with Mark Cox, and so there were a lot of things that you guys talked about. I want to see if maybe we could take a little different direction and just start it off by talking about your childhood. A lot of us have heard about your stories in martial arts and how you got into martial arts, but I don't think that a lot of people have heard about your childhood. So if you want to start with that.
Okay, well, I have a pretty good history of my childhood. Some people, I don't know if these kids nowadays study the history of pre-World War II. My parents were in a Japanese American relocation camp after Pearl Harbor in 41. The Japanese Americans on the West Coast were herded into horse stalls at Santa Anita and then divvied out into different relocation camps. They called them relocation camps. They were actually prison or concentration camps because there was barbed wire and armed soldiers. But my parents didn't know each other. They were young people, and one was from Los Angeles, one was from Ventura, and they just by chance were put into a camp in Gila Bend, Arizona, in a desolate place in the desert in Arizona. So they met, their two families met. They lived close to each other in the camp. And my mother and father met there. So if it wasn't for that horrible, horrible section of the history of the US, I wouldn't be here because my parents wouldn't have met. So it turned out a negative thing turned out to be a positive thing, and that I'm here. And me and my sister, I have a sister who's 5 years younger than me. So my parents met in the camp, and then they went to Chicago where her family lived, and then they migrated across. So I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and then my father's family lived in LA, so we drove across the country when I was 6 months old. So I'm basically from Los Angeles, even though I was born in Chicago. So that's my very early days over there. So I was raised. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think that I ever remember hearing that story. I don't know that I knew that story ever. And you probably don't talk about it a lot.
No, I don't. No. So once in a while people ask, but people don't ask you about your childhood. I mean, that's not something normally you tell people. You tell people about what you're doing now or what you did a few years ago, but your childhood, especially at my advanced age, my childhood was a long, long time ago.
And how did that shape your family unit and growing up and the values that your family instilled in you as you were growing up?
Well, I'm a third generation Japanese American. My grandparents, my father's mother and father, actually my father's mother, my grandmother, was a picture bride. A go-between put the two together. Two good families. They sent their documents and they did their resumes and they put the two families together and they agreed, I guess they paid a price too, to come to this country to have a better life than they did in Japan. So they met in this country. They didn't meet each other till they came here, and that it was all prearranged. So it wasn't a courtship or anything like we have today. Mm-hmm. So out of that, my father and my aunt, the two children, came from that marriage. And my aunt never married, so she never had kids. And my father had my sister and myself. So that's the Ichikawa side of the family. My mother's side of the family, my mother had 6 siblings. She had a large family from Ventura. And so she comes from a bigger family. She came from a bigger family. And now there's only one left alive. All the rest have passed. Wow. So that's how the background of our families.
And talk about your sister a little bit and just kind of growing up, some of the things that you like to do as kids and some of the memories that you have.
Well, those people who have siblings who are 5 years younger or older understand the situation. I was 5 years old when she was born, And when I was 10, she was 5. I didn't when you're 10-year-old boy, you don't want to have anything to do with a 5-year-old sister. And then when I was 15-year-old teenager, I had a 10-year-old sister. I didn't want to have anything to do with her again. So we didn't even make any kind of a connection until we became adults. And even then, she lives in Santa Monica and I live in Thousand Oaks, so it's difficult for us to get together a lot. But we see each other on special occasions. She has one daughter, so that connection, we never were close. If we were a couple of years apart, like my grandkids are 2 years apart, they'll be close their whole lives.
Hmm.
And my kids are fairly close in age, so they get along really well. But because my sister and I were 5 years apart, we never were what we call close.
Right. And how about with your mom and dad? What was your relationship with them like? What kind of things did you do with your dad as you were growing up, or things that you shared with your mom?
It was a I grew up, I was a kid in the 50s and teenager in the 60s. And it was a tradition. We call it a traditional family. My father went out to work and brought home the paycheck and came home and sat down and read the paper. My mother was the little woman in the kitchen in the 50s. And she would make dinner and serve him and clean up afterwards. That's the way our lives were. I wish, if I had another wish, I wish my father had been more interactive with me, like, throw the football with me in front or play catch and baseball or go hit some balls in the park or something like that. But he never was that kind of a father. He was always working because he had that Japanese work ethic. His job was to provide for the family. So he was a TV repair person in the early days of TV, in the early days of television. He made our first television set. He brought
Wow.
home boxes for a little tiny picture tube about this big, and he brought a bunch of tubes and a motherboard like we have today, except it had tubes in it. It wasn't computerized. So, and he created, because he went to school for that, he created our first TV set. I remember, we were so excited to watch television for the very first time. Of course, there
Right.
was only like 2 stations on TV that only lasted a few hours, but we got to watch a little bit of TV before anybody else did. We listened to the radio. We had a big radio that we listened to programs on the radio. Kids today would go nuts if they had our technology. When I was
Right.
a kid, there was
Right.
no technology. So
the
it was
things
crazy.
the things that you kept yourself busy were very, very different than a screen and an
Oh,
iPad and all
oh,
that stuff.
totally. We had to go out and play, go outside and play. And
Right.
who do we play with? Whoever's out there.
Right.
And we
Right.
and we couldn't. That my mom would say, "Go out and play," and then she says, "You come back before it gets dark, or else you don't get dinner." And that was it. If you mess up, you come back. Oh, it's dark. Sorry. Where's the dinner? Oh, I put it away. So we always did that. And they never worried about us because we knew where home was and we didn't go far away. And they knew all the kids in the neighborhood. And that's what the kids today miss, going out and playing with the kids in the neighborhood.
Definitely, definitely, just a totally different time. Well,
Right.
hearing about your relationship with your father is very different than your relationship with your son and with your
Oh, absolutely.
daughters. And do you think that made you think, hey, I wish I would have had a little stronger relationship with my dad. I'm going to make sure that I do that with my kids. Was that kind of
That's That's exactly how I felt, how I feel. What I missed with my dad, I didn't want my kids to miss with me. The only problem was, and from the early days of running your own school, that in the early days, I mean, I was the instructor, salesperson, janitor. I was everything. There was nobody else. I ran the whole show. Though I didn't have a cleanup crew. I didn't have program directors. I didn't have anybody else. I did the whole thing. So I had to be there all the time. Unfortunately, that was the time my kids were little and they were growing up. So I missed the chance to do a lot of homework and put them to bed, read them stories. And when I did come home early, I just looked forward to that. And I look forward to it on weekends when I got a chance to do that. So unfortunately, if I could go back and change things, I would spend more time with the kids when they were little. That's why I like to spend as much time with my grandkids as I can, because I'm going through it again.
right? And we'll get talking about that, because that's towards the end of our story today. Let's get back to your childhood. Did you play sports in school, or were you involved in other activities before getting in a rock band, which we'll talk about, and then, and then getting into martial arts? So, what were some of your hobbies and things that you did as a kid?
I was because of the fact that we had to go out and fend for ourselves, we would find a pile of wood and we would build things. My friends and I built the early skateboards. We got a 2x4 and we got a saw and we hand sawed the wood, and we had metal roller skates
Right.
that we'd take a screwdriver and take them apart, and they had crude metal wheels, and we'd get nails and we nail it to the bottom of the 2x4, and we'd have skateboards. And actually, we built a handle like this, so it was more like a scooter than a skateboard. Then we discovered, let's take the handle off and just ride it as a skateboard. And we'd bail because we couldn't maneuver it like the skateboards today. There was no fancy stuff. We just go.
Right.
Luckily, we go in a straight line, and hopefully, you don't hit something and kill yourself. So that didn't happen. But we had a lot of bumps and bruises in those days. We learned the hard way. But those were the great days to build things. So I was active in that, and I remember building hurdles because I was watching the Olympics. And I was fascinated with these guys hurdling. So I practiced running and jumping over the hurdles and running. So in high school, I wasn't big enough to play football or baseball or basketball. So I got into track because in those days, they had varsity and they had B track, which was the smaller guys, and they had C track, was the little guys. So I guess where I was in the C track. But we got to do the same things that the varsity guys did, but on a lesser scale. So I got into pole vaulting, believe it or not.
Wow.
Those are the days of the aluminum poles that did not bend. I watch these pole vaulters now, and they sit back on it and they get catapulted up.
Right.
I don't know,
Right.
the world record is like 20 feet or something like that. So I lettered in track. I got to have a letterman's jacket and be the whole. And I was a student body officer in high school. And that was, I got into politics in high school a little bit, and running for office, give a campaign speech and all that stuff, and be on student council. Those are the good days. I really had a good high school career. But that's when I got into sports.
And so, you talk about giving speeches and stuff. And the first thing I thought is, I can, as far as young as I can remember myself listening to you speak, you always had this gift of telling stories and just being very comfortable speaking. Is that where it all started back in high school, that you got used to speaking?
I had the pleasure of, I had to take a public speaking class in high school. Actually, I took one in junior high. They call it middle school now. And I didn't know. One of the greatest fears of life, everybody says, is public speaking, greater than death. So people would rather be in the box than give the eulogy, which is amazing to me, because you know how you feel and I feel. You give us a mic and we'll do whatever we want to do, right? We'll talk forever because of the word confidence. When you have confidence, you can get up and talk to people, especially if you know what you're talking about. That helps a lot too.
Right.
But public speaking, I took a public speaking class in high school, and the teacher was so considerate and so confidence building. I mean, she was she was a big advocate of the art of public speaking. And she gave us topics that we could talk about. And one of them, the hardest one, was the extemporaneous speech. She would pick a topic out of a box, and we had to talk about it for 5 minutes. That was the hardest thing, especially if it's something you know nothing about. So you have to learn how to BS a little bit, and kind of tell stories that maybe the students don't know, and they figure, well, that could be true. Sounds convincing.
Right.
But talking about the martial arts to my students is not something that's difficult, because I lived it and I was there. I was fortunate enough to begin the martial arts in the early days, not as early as some of the older martial artists, but when Chuck Norris, before Chuck Norris was, Walker, Texas Ranger, or anything like that. So because of that, I have a lot of material to reach back on for my stories. And people like to hear about it, because I like to hear from Mr. Johnson and Mr. Norris about their stories too, because that was the history, because there are no books on that. The books, the history was the talks, the stories they told us. So I would read up on that.
it was something that I talk about often, and every time black belt testing comes up, I even sent you a message and said that I made sure that I gave the three responsibilities,
Right.
and
I was
and
proud of you for that.
those things stick with us. I mean, we used to Wednesday nights when we did forms. It wasn't really about the forms. Nobody really cared about the forms. I think all we wanted to hear was Mr. Chikawa is going to tell us a story, or he's going to teach us a lesson through a story, and it was just that to me always, it always grabbed me, and it still does. I love hearing, and that's why I'm just excited to be able to share these stories, because now my students, my friends, my family, the person that I talk about, the person that I look up to, they get to hear it, right? And here's
Right.
Mr. Buchan's watching it Wednesday night story time. That's what it was. Yeah, we got a
He's
little bit
heard
of forms.
he's heard a few stories.
Yes, sir. Yes, he has.
He's been part of a few stories too.
Yes, he has. Yes. So let's talk about, in between high school and college. I'm not sure where the rock and roll era began for you, and I know you were in a band for a short time, and then you went to UCLA. So whichever came first, let's go that direction.
That's exactly when it happened between high school and college. I was a senior in high school, and one of my friends was in a band, and I knew nothing about instruments except that they played music, but I didn't play one myself. So he says, "Hey, you mind if I teach you how to play guitar?" I said, "What?" He says, "Then you could be in my band because our band needs more. We're just forming now, so we need another guitar player." It was called a rhythm guitar player, somebody who just strums chords. He was a lead guitarist. He played the fancy riffs, and I just played the rhythm. So I said, "I don't have a guitar." So he said, "Let's go downtown and to a pawn shop, and they have some really good guitars." So we went down to a pawn shop, and I had all my life savings, $50 in my pocket, and we went down to the pawn shop. And it's kind of those of you who have never been to a pawn shop, it's kind of a harrowing experience. It's real seedy downtown LA, and it's like the people who are in there, like some homeless people found something on the street and they're trying to pawn it for some money to buy booze or drugs or whatever. And so I'm standing there going, "Let's hurry up and get out of here." So we're looking at a wall of guitars. And my friend said, "Hey, look at that Fender Stratocaster with a blonde neck. It's a sunburst finish." And I'm going, "What's he talking about?" As it turned out, that's kind of the kind of guitar that Eric Clapton played in his early days. And it was up there on the wall. So it had a hard case and the guitar, and he got it down. He played it, and I thought, "Hey, that sounds pretty good." And he said, "This is a really good guitar." And the guy wants $60 for it. He whispers to me, he says, "Offer him 50." So I said, I reached into my pocket and I had, my $50. I said, "This is all I got. What do you think?" He says, "Okay, I'll take it." So I bought my first guitar for $50. And as it turns out, I'm going to come back to it, but many years later, I put it on. In those days, it was the Daily News had a want ad. We didn't have Craigslist and stuff like that in those days, or Offer Up. So we had to put an ad in the paper. I put an ad in the paper on a Wednesday because it broke on Thursday. On Wednesday night, somehow 4 or 5 people got a hold of that newspaper, and I got calls. "Can I come down tonight?" I go, "It's not breaking till tomorrow." The next morning, I said, "No, I'm not going to talk to you." The next morning, there were 3 guys standing out in front of my house,
Wow.
ready to buy that guitar. So I made a mistake. I only sold it for $100. I figured I'd double my money, and I made a lot of money playing the guitar too with the band. But as it turns out, I could have gotten much, much more than that because it was a collector's item. I wish I would have kept it. Anyway, going back, he taught me how to play guitar. So I went to the band practice and I played some chords and we sang. He taught me how to sing harmony to some Rolling Stones song. Last time that I remember that song. And so we played it and I sang harmony to him. And the band says, "Okay, I was the old guy in the band. I was like 2 years older than everybody. I was a senior and they were sophomores. So and they were leaderless. So I almost instantly became the father figure leader of the group. I had to guide them because they were always standing around doing, "What do we do now? What do we do now?" So I automatically said, "Let's do this. Let's do that. Oh, okay. Let's do this. Let's do that." So that's how we started. And we grew. And as it turned out, the guy that got me into the band, they wanted to kick him out because he had a caustic personality. He wasn't a team player. He was an individual. So they were trying to figure a way to get him out. And so we finally got, because we had another guitar player that was a nice guy. So we got him out, got him in. So as it turned out, the guy that got me in the band was kicked out. Then we got then we got a really good Japanese American girl singer, a little tiny 5 foot tall Tina. She had a giant voice. And when she came to our band, somebody heard about her singing, and we auditioned her, and we were just blown away at her voice. So once we hired her to be on our band, we just took off. We started off playing in the days of, in the 60s when my band was playing, there was a circuit of dance bands, garage bands, sororities, fraternities, and groups had parties, or they hired halls. And they like 200-300 people halls, and there was one big hall with 500 people capacity, and they'd hire bands to play, and they dance. We did cover songs, Motown and things like that. So people liked the dance to the songs they were familiar with. Right. I don't know if kids dance today, but they missed out because those were the good old days. And so we would play, and we'd be the first band because we were new. And there'd be the janitors and the bartenders and the ushers were there, and there was like 2 or 3 people, and we get this applause like this because there's nobody to clap. Right. So we'd be playing, basically practicing in a venue. That's basically what it was, a practice. And as we grew, we move up from the first spot to the second spot. Then we moved from the second to the third, and there was usually 4 spots, and the 4th spot was a feature band. They played last when all the crowd was there. They got the big money. Well, in those days, the big money. And so we worked our way up to the top band. We were the top band in the circuit. We would play sometimes 2 gigs on Friday night, 2 gigs on Saturday night. We'd be busy. We'd go from one, take our equipment down, and move to the next venue. And then on Sunday, we practice. That was the deal. Boom, 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 boom. So I was the bookkeeper. I had a ledger book. I don't know, Jason, if you ever had a ledger book. In the old days, we write everything down, right?
I remember you used to keep one even at the
TL
studio, though.
Oh, with our tuitions and everything. I would do that. I might still have them somewhere. So I had the ledger book of the venue, the date, and how much we made. And then we divvy the money up. And first we pay expenses, then we divvy the money up. And we made, in 3.5 years together, we made $250,000.
Wow.
In those days, in the 60s and 70s, that was huge money. I wish I had that now. But
what was the band's name?
It's called The Chosen Few.
The Chosen Few.
Yeah,
all right.
We spelled it Thee, Chosen, Chozen.
Right.
Few. Okay.
Nice.
We wanted to be a little bit different because the term The Chosen Few has been used, that's an elite group. They're the chosen few. So we wanted to change it just a little bit. Copyright infringement too. We didn't want to copyright infringe anybody. So we became, that was one of the highlights of my life. I'll never forget those days. Our last gig, our final night, everybody knew we were going to be breaking up. So we played in the largest venue called Roger Young Auditorium in LA. 500 people standing body to body like this. It was a sea of people. When I looked out there, if somebody fainted, they wouldn't have fallen down because there were wedged. It was like Times Square, smaller venue of Times Square on New Year's Eve. So I just remember everybody swaying back and forth toward the last song. And we just got a rousing applause, and it kept on going. It was, brought a tear to everybody's eye. It was great. Those were the good old days.
Well, it's really fun to hear about those stories and hear about all that because, for me, I just remember a picture of you with really long hair.
Oh, yes.
And playing. And I was like, I thought maybe that was kind of a blip, but 3.5 years is kind of a long time, right? So
yes, it was.
And it sounds like it was a really had a big impact on you. You love to perform. I know that you've always loved to get out there and perform. Is that what maybe sparked some of that performance bug?
Well, it gave me the confidence to know that people liked what we were doing. Mm-hmm. So confidence is a great motivator in performance. If you have the confidence to perform, you're going to perform better than if you're insecure up there. So that confidence that I got from being up there on the stage with all those people enjoying what we were doing carried over to the martial arts. Especially when I got more skill in the martial arts, then I didn't mind. I had that all of us who like to perform have that little show off bug in us,
Right.
I want to show you how good I am type thing. That's what I tell my students when they're wringing their hands before a test, trying to shake them out. I'm going, what are you nervous about? I said, you should only be nervous if you're not prepared. If you're not prepared, be nervous. I said, did you practice? Yes. Are you ready? Yes. Okay. A little nervous is okay. Get you going. But be confident out there. You show off how good you are. You show that panel that you can do everything they ask you to do and more. And they say, oh, thank you so much.
The the voice of, I think it's Muhammad Ali, is ringing in my ear when he says that, I'll show you how great I am. There's a
Right.
bunch of
Exactly.
videos, that powerful, just powerful statement. Were you, as a kid, when you were younger, were you kind of a ham, or were you kind of more quiet and reserved?
Uh, in in elementary school, I was quiet and reserved. Middle school, quiet and reserved. I didn't come out of I hung out with the little guys because I had that complex, that Napoleon complex, like those big guys, especially the jocks. The jocks were the guys that were I don't want to turn off any of you jocks in the audience out there, but sometimes jocks look down at little guys and say, how's the air down there? Hey, I can see the top of your head. Can I rest my arm on your head? Things like that. It just, they just tease us and tease us. So I hung out with the meek guys, the nerds, the guys who got good grades and those the guys who are probably doctors and lawyers and probably hiring those jocks
Right.
to
Right.
work for them,
Maybe.
right? They're the boss of the jocks. Okay. But anyway, I was not a in front person. I would lack confidence. I always walked down the hallways in fear that somebody was going to. I didn't get overtly bullied, but it was like, little verbal digs and looks and things like that.
Right.
So, but I went to a multiracial elementary, middle school, and high school, so there was no overt racism going on there. I had the advantage of being raised with Black people, Hispanics, and Asians all mixed together, and a large Jewish population too. So I got a chance to have all cultures. So that's a plus. But the performance thing, the confidence thing, didn't come until high school. In high school, somehow when I was getting ready to run for student body office, you get together with all the leaders of the school, the kids who are upwardly mobile, the kids are going to go to the good colleges and have the good jobs. So that was a plus because I went from being in a little clique of meek little people to being with the student leaders of the school. And there was two Japanese American girls clubs, and they had what they called mascots, which were actually like chaperones, bodyguards, drivers, so the girls didn't have to go to places by themselves. They had guys driving them and walking with them. So I was honored. They asked me to to be a mascot for their girls club. And I thought, oh my God, such an honor. Because I always looked up to, these were the best looking girls who were the coolest and they got the best grades, and there were some of them were athletes and yada, yada, yada. So I said, oh man, for sure I'll do that. And that's when I gained confidence because I became one of the in crowd. I went from the out crowd to the in crowd. And that was in high school. I'm sure it's still like that. There's crowds. So
Absolutely.
that gave me probably the biggest boost in confidence in my whole life, that high school experience. So I'm very glad that I had that experience.
And were your parents, you talked about, being in the 50s, 60s, just the roles that they played in life. Were they confident, strong leaders in the community? Were they involved, or how did they interact in the community?
Okay, my parents are called the Nisei. That's the second generation. The first generation is called Issei. That means first, like Ichi, Nissan. So my grandparents migrated to their Issei, their first generation. Their mentality or their social status was they were new people in this country. They were visitors in this country. So they had to toe the line and just be quiet and work hard. Don't rock the boat. Don't make waves. My parents, the second generation in this country, Niseis, they were the first generation that was born. They were born Americans in this country. They grew up speaking English and having American traditions. But the Japanese tradition still was about, I'd say 60, 70% of their persona, the Japanese, because they were raised by total Japanese parents. So the language, they spoke half Japanese, half English. So I had the pleasure. My grandparents lived until I was a teenager. So I got a chance to listen to them, not maybe speak to them so much, but understand their Japanese. And they spoke, like baby Japanese to me, like elementary Japanese, so I could understand them. So that was it was very fortunate. But my parents' generation weren't, except for a few activists, and that was very few, were still of the old school way of don't rock the boat, just do your job, work hard, pay your bills, and live a clean life, and you'll be accepted in this society. That was their persona.
Hmm.
So when they were put into these internment camps, my mother, especially my mother, spoke with great joy of how much fun she had in camp. And we said, my sister and I said, Mom, you were in concentration camp. There were armed soldiers with barbed wire keeping you in there. If you tried to get away, you would have been shot. I go, how can you say that was fun? Oh, I was the queen of the camp, and we had parties and dances. I'm going, because she was like 18, 19 years old. She was like college age. I went, oh my gosh. So the next generation, my generation, the Sansei generation, third generation, we are the activists. We're the Americans. We just have Japanese ancestry, but we're really Americans. So the Japanese American part was underlined, the American part. They're the ones that passed, where they were instrumental in having Ronald Reagan sign the bill to give reparations to the Japanese who were interned. So my parents and my parents' generation got some piddly $20,000 a piece for being taken from their homes. The only thing they could take with them is the stuff they carried on their backs or in a wagon, and they were herded off. Some of the people lost land. My uncle's family lost farmland in the Imperial Valley. I mean, lush farmland. They just had to let somebody take it over or give it to a neighbor and to say, would you watch this for me? And then the neighbor sold it and made the money, and so they never saw it again. But luckily my parents were just renting a house, so they didn't lose much, just some possessions. But I feel bad for those people that lost major things. So that's my generation is the activist generation. And then my kids' generation, the Yonsei generation, they're fully entrenched. They're just keeping in touch with my generation to keep their heritage. And I'm glad my kids are proud of their heritage and they keep that. It's the Japanese heritage is very strong.
Hmm. And do you still carry on Japanese traditions in the home and celebrations and things with your kids that you pass down traditions that you learned as a child?
Absolutely, we do. Especially the main thing we do with the food, eating with chopsticks and the rice. With many you can't eat Asian food with a fork. It doesn't taste good. In fact, Melissa, my oldest daughter, she has portable. I don't know if she still does. She has portable chopsticks, and she puts in a case and keeps in her bag wherever she goes. That tradition and the Japanese sayings, some of the phraseology. I mean, most ethnic cultures have old time phrases of their own language that don't translate real well to English. So we use all those. Even my grandkids use some of those.
Mm.
And it's when I see my 3-year-old granddaughter use Japanese phrases, it just cracks me up.
And I bet it makes you very proud as well.
Yes, it does. It does. They understand what they're saying, and if I ask my 5-year-old grandson Mateo, what does warukoto mean? He goes, that means you're doing bad things, Grandpa. I went, okay, that's right. You're right. So
That's
he
awesome.
says those things instinctively. It's like knee-jerk thing. Somebody does something wrong, he knows the phrase in Japanese. He doesn't know it in English, but he knows it in Japanese. So that's a tradition we kept the most.
One of the things that I've always enjoyed most about training under you is that tradition was always important, and growing up in a family that tradition was reinforced. I come from an Italian background, and my mom is super proud of being Italian, and her father, and would talk about the stories, but the traditions and just all of that, and that's where it kind of paralleled in my life, having the martial arts and having the tradition at home, and now as an adult becoming Catholic. Tradition has always been such a huge part of my life, and I know that's something that we share in common.
I know it helped that tradition, that Asian tradition that I had, really helped in teaching martial arts because it is Asian, and trying to teach it to Americans who don't necessarily come from that background. I'm glad to see that my students and your students and everybody else's students have embraced that tradition of martial arts, and that that respect and all those things that come with it. And that's, we haven't lost that. Some martial, I'm sure you've seen more martial artists than I have, because you've been traveling around and teaching and mentoring. A lot of people are struggling because they don't have the tradition. They're trying to be, oh, let the kids do whatever they want to do. Let's not be too strict with them. Let's do this, let's do that. But then they lose the tradition of the martial arts, the heritage of it, and the whole essence is gone.
Right. Or we're trying to chase after the flashy, new, bright,
Right,
shiny thing,
right,
right? Instead of
right.
sticking with, what works. There's nothing wrong with keeping tradition and evolving, right? There's a difference
Exactly.
between
Right,
evolving tradition and, oh, let's go for that. All the people that did cardio kickboxing, or they
right,
did this or they did that or they did, and it's a flash in the pan, but
right,
the traditional martial arts has what, I know for us, it's what has maintained the value in what we do. I mean, people see great value in that tradition and all the morals and the ethics that we teach.
right.
Let's talk.
I think that's why the parents bring their kids to us, because we do have that strong core strength of fundamentals and beliefs,
Mhm,
and we stand with it. Then we have, Krav and Jiu-Jitsu and everything else, XMA and all that stuff that goes around it, but we still have this
mhm.
right here, this core. And I
Right.
think the parents appreciate that, because they have a hard time telling their kids to say yes and be polite and, concentrate and do all the right things in life, because all the other influences are like, do whatever you want to do.
Right. Right.
I don't
Right.
want to
Right.
discipline my kids. I want to be a friend of my kid. I go, you want to be no, you be a parent to your kid, not a friend.
We could have a whole discussion about that one, but let's save that for another time. Let's talk
Okay.
about let's talk about going to UCLA. I know you're super proud of being an alumni from UCLA, and so talk about your experience there.
I in the days when I was in high school. Nowadays, I understand you have pre-SATs, you have SATs, you got to you have to have a GPA that's higher than 4.0 to get into any school. Boy, I never would have made it into UCLA, because I had a high B average. Yeah, I didn't have straight A's. I was a good student, but I wasn't one of those people who was going to stay up all night studying. I figured, I had the theory that if I'm fresh for the next day's exam, little I do know, I'll be able to apply. But if I do an all-nighter and I'm going to be groggy, I'm not going to be able to regurgitate all that knowledge. So I was a strong B student, and I didn't have to take an SAT to get into UCLA. Just my transcript alone. I remember getting the letter from UCLA, and I opened it up. I'm like, oh, I got accepted! Yay!
Hmm.
And in those days, in high school, they had different. Everybody now graduates in what, May or June, right?
Mhm.
In my days, we had a winter class that graduated in December, and then a summer class that graduated in June. So I was a winter class. So I graduated on a Thursday, and on Monday, I was at UCLA. That was, talk about a culture shock, from
Wow.
Dorsey High School in the inner city to UCLA and Westwood. I walked on that campus, I was just in awe. Those of you who have never seen UCLA, you have to see UCLA. It's just like the college. It's like the West Coast version of Harvard, because not no ivy walls, but you see all the grandeur, the pictures you always see of a college, a university. So I was just in awe of UCLA. The problem is, you go from high school, which is, you can get through high school with your smarts and your wits. Can't do that at UCLA. You're with the cream of the crop at UCLA. If you think you were smart in high school, you're nothing at college. Some of those people are asking the professors questions that the professor had to say, I'm going to do some research and I'll get back to you tomorrow with the answer.
Hmm.
The professor couldn't answer the question of the student. I'm going, maybe I'm in the wrong class. I had to go to find the classes that I understood what the
Hmm.
teachers and students were talking about. So I started UCLA with a pre-dentistry major. I wanted to be an orthodontist. That was my goal. Okay. And two things, I make this joke all the time to my family. Two things got in my way: chemistry and physics. I could not get, oh my gosh. Those are the classes that people were asking the questions. The nerds in the front row have their hands up asking the professor questions about something that I didn't even understand what he lectured about. And they're asking him questions that he can't answer. And I said, I think I'm in the wrong part of the campus. So
Right.
I quickly changed my major to public relations, a public service, it's called. I just wanted to go into PR, do something like that with people. I wanted to work with people. not numbers and chemical symbols and things like that. So I said, okay, I'm going to change my goals. I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know I want to work with people. So I changed majors and I rearranged things. I enjoyed my college life much better. I started college with a lot of my classmates from high school, and little by little by little, they started dropping out. I was the only one left. That was crazy. I had, in my freshman year, I got to impart this because this is part of my past and most people don't know about. As a freshman, when you're in college from high school has rules. You can do this, you can't do that, you can't leave campus, you can't do this. In college, nobody cares if you're there or not, right? If you don't show up, it's on you. Nobody takes roll, nobody takes attendance. If you don't show up for an exam, you fail. That's it.
Right.
It's real life. So I played with that. I didn't go to class. I didn't go to lectures. I tried to make it through exams on my smarts. My grades went. So after my first semester at UCLA, I got put on what they called academic probation, which means you're being watched. It's kind of like the prison system. You're on probation, right? You got a parole officer. No, I didn't have a parole officer, but I was called into the counselor's office and I was read the riot act that if I don't straighten up, then I'm out. So they said, you have to go to a junior college for 1 semester and you have to have a GPA above 3.0 in these 5 or 6 accepted courses. And if you don't do that, you can't come back to UCLA. Oh boy, was that a wake-up call. So I went to Los Angeles City College. I enrolled in 12 units of the courses that they did, and I got on the dean's list. I proved it to them. I was going to show UCLA I'm good enough to be a Bruin. So I got on the dean's list, and the next semester I was back at UCLA, and then straight through, got a bachelor's degree. Then when I got my degree, they called me and they said, you're a candidate for the master's program. Would you like to enroll in the master's program? It's a 2-year program. And I said, thank you. I appreciate the knowledge, but I'm off to live my life. I was done with school.
I want to share this with you too. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but Gary Witkowski is watching. And when you were talking about the chemistry and physics, he said he didn't apply to medical school. Instead, he did dentistry because there was less physics and chemistry. So, yep.
I couldn't even take basic physics and chemistry. Couldn't even stand that.
I didn't even make it that far. So
I guess it's good for all you guys that I didn't go into dentistry.
100%. So now we'll get to kind of the meat of what probably a lot of people have been waiting to hear more about. And as they're watching it, they're okay. Well, how did he get started in martial arts? Where did that start? And I've heard the story probably a couple thousand times, but I would love for you just to tell that story of how you got involved in martial arts and when that all started.
It's amazing because I believe it was at your studio on Kazuku Court. Dave Kovar had his instructors seminar, whatever it was.
Yes.
That was your studio, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
The whole alliance was there. Even Bo DeRocher brought his Krav people from Huntington Beach there.
Yep.
And it was a massive group of people. And we sat down there with Kovar, and he said, I want everybody to tell a story about how you got here or something like that, right? And he pointed at me. He says, I'm going to start with you because you're the head guy here. I said, whoa, what? I'm on the spot? I didn't know you were going to say this. Anyway, as shy as I am, I got to talk about it. I was there, and you all know me, because when I graduated from UCLA with my bachelor's degree in public service, and I still proudly have my diploma up on the wall in my office, I had a choice. I was working for Ralph's. I worked my way through college. I started as a bagger, and then I got shopping carts, and I got to be a clerk and check people out. Then I got to be stock. Then I worked in all the departments except meat. I would not work in the meat department. I'm not vegan. My daughter's vegan, but it's okay. I'm not into that. Anyway, I worked in the liquor department, and they liked me. The liquor manager liked me, because I don't know why. Because I guess my family likes to drink. My Ichikawa family, not me, but my Ichikawa family likes to drink. So I knew all the different kinds of booze and all that, and the beers. And so, I could order for them and everything. So they offered me the managership. The liquor manager was being promoted to supervisor. So there was an opening. So they offered me a cush managerial liquor manager job at Ralph's. 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, union benefits, all that stuff with healthcare and pension plan. And I thought, wow, that's pretty awesome. And then I was looking, after I graduated, I did let my fingers do the walking through the classified ads. I don't know if they still have classified ads. Maybe they do online, but the LA Times had a nice big classified ad section. So I was looking through the classified ad section, and then I saw this little tiny ad that said, looking for young people to work in exciting new public relations field, make lots of money, work with beautiful women. And I thought, oh boy, that sounds very interesting. Call this number for an appointment. So I got the phone, push the buttons, corded phone. And the young lady on the other end of the line said, Chuck Norris Karate Studio, may I help you? And I said, oh, excuse me, I must have called the wrong number. And before I could say wrong number, she said, are you calling about the ad in the Times? And I said, yes, I am. She goes, which edition of the Times did you get? Sunday or regular? I said, Sunday. She goes, have you ever trained in the martial arts? I said, no, I haven't. And then she proceeded to ask me a whole presentation of yes, no questions all the way down. She led me right into the final thing. So which day would be the best for you to come down and talk to us? Monday or Wednesday? And I said, Wednesday. She gave me 2 positives. She goes, morning, afternoon, or evening? I said, afternoon. She goes, I got a 1 o'clock, a 2 o'clock. Which one would be best for you? 2 o'clock. Okay, I got you down for 2 o'clock. She affirmed my phone number. We'll give you a call the day before, yada, yada, yada. Before I knew, I had an appointment to go down.
Perfect training. Like whoever trained her on the phone was amazing.
I told Bob Wall, the man who hired me, I told him, I said, that girl should be promoted. She did her job. She is real. I finally met her. She was gorgeous.
And you throw out the name Bob Wall, like, oh, it's just Bob Wall. But anybody watching, tell them who Bob Wall is.
If you don't know who Bob Wall is, you haven't seen Enter the Dragon or some of his movies. He's best known for the Ohara. He had that scar down his face from the glass from Bruce Lee's sister that he killed. He's more known with us because he was instrumental. First of all, he's responsible for me being right here talking to you right now, because he put that ad in the paper. They had a vision of having the Chuck Norris Karate Studios Inc. go nationwide with a chain of karate studios under Chuck Norris. And they used the model for Jack LaLanne European health spas. Some of you aren't old enough to know who that is, but some of you do. He had a chain, Jack LaLanne had a national chain of health spas. And they wanted to use that business model to do Chuck Norris Karate Studios across the country. So they needed to recruit people, managers, instructors, et cetera, et cetera. So Bob Wall wanted to recruit management trainees. So that's what the ad was all about. That's why they got me in there. So he and several other executives, some of them from the Jack LaLanne organization, they lured them away and they got them to work for the Chuck. The reason why it didn't work is because too many egos. They clashed like this. They all clashed. The only guy that didn't have an ego was Chuck Norris. Imagine that. Chuck Norris is the only guy that didn't clash with them, because those of you who ever met Chuck Norris, he's a prince. He's a strong person, but he's not the kind that likes controversy. And Bob Wall thrives on controversy. The first run-in I had with Bob Wall on the negative side, he was a prince to me when he hired me. But I was a white belt, and I was out on the mat in my lunch break. Instead of eating lunch, I would just work out because I didn't know anything. So they had heavy bags hanging. I was kicking and punching. Little I knew, punching a heavy bag. And Bob Wall comes into the studio with his attaché case in his hand in his suit, and he reaches for his doorknob, and he turns the doorknob, and it's locked. And he goes in his pockets, and he's looking for his keys. Can't find his keys. And I'm watching all this out of the corner of my eye. And he utters a nice profane word, and he front kicks the door open. Pow! And everything goes flying. And he turns to me and he says, "Call a locksmith." And he walks in his office. And I stood there with my mouth open like, what did I just see? What did I just see? Call a locksmith. Oh my gosh.
So when you came in for the interview, did you meet with Chuck Norris on that very first time?
No, he wasn't there. I didn't meet Chuck Norris till later on. No, Bob Wall was the man that handled all the hiring.
And
It wasn't just me. We had like 4 guys, 5 guys in there that came in for the ad. And it was a group interview type thing. And he was going to take all of us. He was going to try all of us out. And I think the deciding factor that he used was we had to sign. He made us sign a contract to they called it a red belt program. Okay. They had a self-defense program for 3 months. They had a red belt program for 2 years. They had a black belt program. And so he made us sign a 2-year commitment, and he made us pay money, $25 a month. It cost $25 a month to train in those things. Ooh. But it was a marketing ploy to get new students, and it was a ploy to get management trainee people. So he was, I don't know for a fact, I have to ask him, but I think for a fact he was seeing how many people lasted in the martial arts. Those people who lasted in the martial arts were good enough to be management trainees or managers. Because you should have seen our class drop off, just like white belts. A lot of white belts, you have 50 white belts in class, and then a couple months later, there's 40, and then same thing happens with this. The training was too tough. Bob Wall was tough on us in sales. He was really tough, but I learned a lot from him. How to sell, there's sellers and there's closers. Anybody can sell, but how many people can close and get the money in hand? I didn't know that before. I thought you sell something. Okay. The guy says, okay, I'll buy. And you walk away, and they bought it. No, they didn't. You don't have any money. So he pushed us in business, and then we got pushed on the mat from the instructors that were there. And then he decided on, I think out of 30 people, I think only 4 or 5 of us made it to manager. And then after we got our own studios, I think two of us were left after about a year.
And at that time, how many Chuck Norris schools were there when you were hired on, or when you were brought on?
In its heyday, there were 7.
Okay.
There were 7 schools, and all in Southern California area. And it really boomed. They did a small TV commercial that they played on the local channels, KTLA, KHJ, nothing big, nothing network, because you're wasting your advertising dollar. So they just did local blurbs, and they played it, later on at night or early in the morning when it was cheaper. And they had an 800 number. So they had a switchboard. So I was managing the Sherman Oaks studio on Ventura Boulevard. So we got all that area. We got a little bit of LA and all the valley, except for the North Valley, because Granada Hills was there. The studio was there. So you should have seen our white belt classes. Oh my God. They were just huge, because there were all these people coming in from the TV ads. Of course, hardly any of them stayed, because it was just a novelty. But this was before the Karate Kid movie.
Right.
Because that was another boom when the Karate Kid movie. We didn't expect that. That just it hit us like that. So this was earlier, but it was like the studio just. So the Bob Wall's idea was genius. It was just growing like this exponentially.
And this was 69, 70, 71. What year?
I started in 1970.
1970.
So this was early 70s when all this happened.
And when did Enter the Dragon come out?
That was 73.
Okay.
Right, 73.
Okay, so it was kind of in between.
Yes.
Enter the Dragon, then Karate Kid,
right.
Then you had Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers.
Right. No, that the Enter the Dragon movie. They shot part of it at the Sherman Oaks studio. The part when they were showing O'Hara's prowess, the film when Bruce Lee's sitting with Mr. Braithwaite. Mr. Braithwaite, he's sitting watching the film of how awesome O'Hara is and breaking the board over his arm and breaking the flaming tile. Well, my hand is the right hand that lit the flaming tile. They caught me from here to here. They put full makeup on Rick Oki and me. And I thought, because they thought they filmed it, our whole bodies were doing this, but they edited it down that only our hand was on the flaming tiles like that. So we got So Bob Wall did that, and Tadashi Yamashita, Master Sensei Yamashita, broke the 1x4 over his forearm and across his chest like that. Those are no. I didn't get a chance to meet Bruce Lee because he wasn't there. It was just Bob Wall, Yamashita, and the camera crew and the director and all that stuff.
So I didn't know that you had met Master Yamashita.
Yes,
long ago, because he was a legend forever.
He's the one that taught us Bohyang.
Yes, I remember. I
That's
remember
why
that.
that's where I first, no, no, no. I met him sooner than that. I met him at a tournament, an internationals, Long Beach Internationals. Pat Johnson and I were walking by each other, with each other down the concourse, and he says, he waves like this at three Asian men who are walking towards us. And I looked at him and I looked at them, and he says, "Come here, Dennis, I want you to meet these people." So they come up to us. I'm very seldom starstruck. I was starstruck a couple of times. I'll tell you another one a little bit later. But right in front of me, he says, "This is Tadashi Yamashita." I said, "Oh, Sensei, glad to meet you. This is Byung Yu. Oh, Sabum Nim, glad to meet you. This is Bong Su Han. Oh, glad to meet you." I'm going, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit right there in front of me, right? Bong Su
Right.
Han, Byung Yu, and Tadashi Yamashita. I mean, three of the biggest. All three of them grew up in Asia, like in a monastery or something, like, like Kung Fu. They were like the original martial arts that brought their art, Hapkido, Taekwondo, and Shoin-ryu to this country. I'm going, oh, I met these people, and they were so warm and nice and gracious to me. And because I was a white belt, they didn't know who I am. They know Pat Johnson. So every tournament I saw them at, they remembered me and they came up to me and shook my hand. I was so impressed that they would do that. It touched me that I got more respect for them than I already had. So
Right.
that was wonderful.
Now, do you remember your very first class, the very first time you stepped out on the mat?
Oh God, our
Who
I was
was
scared.
teaching that class?
His name was Dave Fisher. I'll never forget him. He was an ex-Marine drill instructor. Okay, if you Google search drill instructor, his picture would be there. Like blonde hair, crew cut like this, big buff guy. Okay, fall in, he would say, like, and we go, whoa. He said, China, face the flag, China, face forward, China, fighting stance. Oh yes. Okay, and we do the same class every day. I thought that's what karate was. The same class every day. Okay, stepping center punch. 1, 2, 3, 4, turning. Oh yeah. Stepping reverse punch. 1, low defense. 1, 2, 3. Every day, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Basics. Guess what the next day was? Same thing. Next day, same thing. But we got real good at it. We didn't dare cross him because he'd yell at you. He'd be doing push-ups forever. He was a tough guy. He was a red belt. He was almost ready to test for black, but he was tough.
Well,
You never forget the first guy.
no, well, and so my first experience, because I started with you at the rec center in Thousand Oaks. The very first class that I stepped in on was Jeff Washington
Jeff
was teaching
Washington,
class,
yes.
and he was a red belt, by the way,
Yes.
at that time. Dude, the biggest dude you've ever
Right.
seen,
Right.
and strong. So it's always that first class. It just kind of sticks with you. But now, what about the first time that you met Chuck Norris? What was that meeting like?
You know what? I'm trying to recall that because there's so many encounters. I can't remember the exact first time, but it was probably when he came in from a meeting. When he comes in from a meeting, comes in street clothes. I don't believe when I first met him, he was in uniform teaching a class because he didn't teach white belt classes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was later on that I remember taking his classes. I think I was a green belt when I took his first class, which, by the way, was the hardest class I've ever taken in my life to this day. He came in for a meeting, and instead of meeting everybody individually, the person, either Pat Johnson or Bob Wall, said, "This is Chuck Norris. These are the management trainees, yada, yada, yada. They're going to manage your studios." Oh, he did go around and shake hands. He was very personable. Shake hands. He was Mr. PR. He was a perfect man to be the PR for his company. Okay. Not a business person necessarily, but a great martial artist and a great PR person, a likable type person. I'm sure to this day, although I haven't spoken to him in many, many years, I'm sure he's still the same.
Both times that I've ever had 3 seconds to talk to him, you could feel just the warmth from he was just such a I explained, he's kind of a good old boy, right? He's just a
Right,
super
yes.
super nice guy, just like Mike Dillard with Century Martial Arts. Mike Dillard, these are both highly successful
Right,
people, and you would never know it because they would typically be wearing jeans and a t-shirt or karate pants.
right,
Mike Dillard
right,
walks the floor at Super Show in karate pants and a t-shirt,
right,
and he's running the whole show. Super super humble people,
right.
and it's amazing.
I
It's
know he
amazing
is.
to see that because you don't see that very often.
No.
What about Pat Johnson? What was your first experience with Pat Johnson like?
Oh, Pat Johnson and I, much better, much closer relationship than Chuck Norris, because Pat Johnson was in charge of. He was a district supervisor that supervised my schools, Sherman Oaks and Granada Hills, and some of the schools on the other side of town. So I got a chance to. He was a tough. Oh boy, was he tough! God, he was a tyrant. Man, if you sit there with your feet up on the desk and he comes walking in, he's going to say he'll knock your feet right off the desk. He. Uh, this guy I work out with, Steve Polk. He had hair down to his shoulders here then. And Pat Johnson didn't like long hair. He didn't like long hair. If you had long hair, he'd grab you by the hair and he'd grab you by the hair. I saw him grab somebody by the hair like this. He said, "Get a haircut." I've got, whoa. He was that kind of person. He was not a warm and fuzzy person. Okay. He was not, I think he was going through a tough phase in his career, because he was going from the captain of the Chuck Norris undefeated fighting team to district supervisor in business. And he didn't know how to handle that transition. I mean, he was a phenomenal instructor. I learned more from him than anybody else. I learned from Chuck Norris how to work out a class so they crawl off the mat, okay, and how to never give up and all that stuff. But I learned how to teach karate and how to get your ideas across to your students from Pat Johnson. So he had a difficult transition to sales management. And I think we suffered for that. One day, Pat Johnson said to me, "Come here, I want to buy you lunch." And I said, "Excuse me?" He says, "I want to buy you lunch. Let's walk across the street to the Hamburger Hamlet over there in Sherman Oaks." I don't know if it's still there, but so we sat down and he says to me, he looks me right in the eye, right across the table. He says, "What do you think of me?" I'm going, "Whoa, well, what do you think of me? What are you going to say to your instructor? What do you think of me? What are you going to say? What can I say to him?" And so I prefaced it. I was diplomatic. I said, "You are the most fantastic instructor any student could have. You taught me so much. I patterned my martial arts after you, sir." Okay. I said, "Your knowledge is just impeccable. And if ever I had a martial arts question, I would come to you immediately." And he says to me, "But," I said, "But people are afraid of you." I said, they every time you come in, they stiffen up. They put everything away. The fun is gone. The joy of being there is gone. I said, "I don't think that you have to rule by fear. I think you can rule by respect. I think you could just be you and people will respect you without demanding that they respect you." You know? Right. And he looked at me and he listened. And I was just so impressed that he wanted to hear what I had to say. He respected my opinion so much. That was just a change in our relationship. We were never like that. We became much closer after that. So long story short, he took everything I said and he appreciated what I said, that I was candid with him and I told him how I felt. And our relationship changed from that day forward. And then his manner of dealing with the managers and the instructors was mind-blowing. It was just, he became much more, smiled, he joked around, just like he did with the other black belts, his peers. And he became a more effective leader. But unfortunately, the organization started breaking up then, so he never got a chance to do anything about that. But he became a stunt choreographer and he gained more success. So, right. When one door closes, another one opens, that type of thing. So right. It all worked out for him.
For sure. Now, you earned your black belt in 1973. Right. That's 1 year before I was born. You're number 67.
Right.
In the Chuck Norris organization. You decided that you were running one of the schools, and you decided to break away in a sense, right? I know that there was a division. You guys had to choose on your black belt test day, but you decided to break away from the organization. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that division was not part of my leaving the organization. That division was Chuck Norris and his group deciding to break ties with Korea, because all Korea wanted was test fees. Right. It was a financial thing. They gave no martial arts advice or backing or anything. They weren't a martial arts organization. They were a business organization. So Chuck Norris and his people decided that it wasn't financially wise or prudent for them to stay with Korean ties. I don't know what percentage of test fees they had to pay, but they had to pay just for a certificate that came from Korea with that, that stamp, that red square stamp with all the squiggly things in it. That was the thing that everybody wanted. You can
Hmm.
buy one of those. I understand them. You can Google, Korean certificates. You could pay X amount of dollars. You can get one of those for any degree you want. So uh, that that was the day of my black belt test, and it was crazy. They called a meeting the day before my black belt test. I'm going, or the day of my black belt test. I'm going, why are they doing this now? I mean, come on, we're testing. So Pat Johnson draws a line on the mat with his foot, an imaginary line. He says, everybody wants to, he's the one that led the meeting. He told everybody why we're gonna Chuck Norris is gonna break away, and anybody who wants to stay with him, stay over here, and everybody who wants to stay with Korea, you stay on that side of the line. So we had about 1/3 of the group of black belts go on the Korean side, and 2/3 go with Chuck Norris. Naturally, all of us candidates wanted to test in an hour, so we went with Chuck Norris. I didn't even know it was going to happen. I didn't even think about it. Although I really respected some of those guys that went with Korea. Okay, those are some of my favorite martial artists and great people. I just felt more allegiance to Pat Johnson and Chuck Norris because they're the ones that gave me, and Bob Wall, because they're the ones that gave me the opportunity. So I stayed there and I tested on that day. That day, Chuck Norris was the panel used the old Korean tradition of they didn't wear uniforms; they wore
Hmm.
street clothes. Actually, the Koreans wore suits,
Right.
sports jacket and ties. I mean, the old fashioned. So, but the Norris people just wore regular clothes. The only time we got to see people wear shoes on the mat, test day. In those days, it was platform shoes with bell bottoms because it was in the 70s.
Right.
So Chuck Norris was the leader of the panel. Pat Johnson sat next to him, and then they went out like this in rank order like that. Now, there were about 10, there was not that many, 10, 15 black belts sitting on the panel. And Chuck Norris didn't say a word. Pat Johnson said everything. Pat Johnson bowed us in, sat down, barked out all the commands, called the people up, told us what to do. The only time Chuck Norris spoke was when the test was over, when our results were given. Then he gave his speech like I still give and you still give, in a different way, but the same things, the
Hmm.
obligations. And he told us second degrees, the same things we say. You're not really a black belt until you've tested as a black belt for second degree. You're just a red belt. He said those things. So I still, that's all I know. So
Hmm.
that's what I say too. And I'm sure you guys all say it too, to your people.
We do.
So that's the only time he spoke. The other time, Pat John. Now, I didn't keep that tradition because I could let Justin do all the talking. And I could just sit there, but I'm so used to running it. I just run it.
Right.
And a couple of times I couldn't be there. Said, Justin, you run. He looks at me like, I said, you
Huh?
can do it. You've been sitting next to me all these years.
Right. What was it like, being a part of, before the division of, Chuck Norris organization and the Korean organization? I mean, was it really different? Was there really any major benefit? Did you really have any kind of true ties to it, or was it just by name only?
It was just my name. They never sent Korean masters over to give seminars or anything like that. Um, so the reason why the other people wanted to stay with ties is just the traditional thing. That's all. It wasn't a physical thing. Absolutely. They probably still had to pay test fees. They probably had to wait. See, the problem with the Tang organization, the Mudokwan, is that you were at the whim of whenever they were having a test. I remember the last time Chuck Norris and Pat Johnson tested, they had to go to Detroit. Grandmaster Wong Ki was having a Tang test in Detroit, Michigan. So they had to travel back there. But before that, they waited months to find out exactly when. First, it was
Mm,
1 month, and it was another month, and they put it back to another month. And I said, you know what? I couldn't do that. I want to get ready for a test on a certain date and then do it. I can't just indefinitely get ready all the time. So that's what you have to do if you're with that kind of organization. You have to always be ready,
right,
which I don't know,
right.
maybe that might be a good thing for them, but for our students, no.
So you were running the Sherman Oaks Karate Studio, and then what was the transition between running that school and managing that school to opening your own school? And how did that change the relationship with Chuck Norris, or did that organization fizzle out? Because I know that you opened Tarzana Karate with Harold Gross. You went from the Capri Plaza and then moved over to the Shirley and Ventura. That's the school I remember the most. what was that transition between running the school and then opening your own school? How was that decision made?
It was kind of forced upon us indirectly. Harold and I, in fact, most of the organization saw the writing on the wall that the organization was on its last legs. It was crumbling. They changed ownership, meaning people who invested, the big money guys. They went from one big money guy to another big money guy. They kept the Bob Wall, Chuck Norris, Pat Johnson, the employees there, but the big ownership changed hands to a guy named Irwin Paris, who was a big health spa chain guy, and he was a wacko. I didn't like him at all. In fact, I conveniently got sick the day of the managers meeting that he held first, and I'm glad I didn't go because they said he started the meeting by wadding up money and throwing it on the floor and making the guys dive for it. I thought, you know what? If I was there, I would have sat there and I would have let them. I'm not going to dive for. I don't care how much money is on the floor. I'm not going to dive for it. That's the kind of person he was. And I thought, I don't want to have anything to do with that kind of person. So we saw it coming. So we started looking, and we were decent enough to look far enough away, 5-mile radius thing. I don't think we signed a non-compete. We might have, but non-competes, I think, only go 5 miles. So we went more than 5 miles all the way to Tarzana, and we looked around and we reserved a spot there. Somehow, you know how small karate studios are. The word gets out. Somehow the word got to Chuck Norris, and through his attorney. One day, Harold and I were sitting in the office at Sherman Oaks, and through the back door comes in street clothes, Chuck Norris, Pat Johnson, and Dave Glickman, his attorney. The three of them came walking in. I went, oh God. Harold and I looked at each other and went, oh my God, it's going to hit the fan right now. So we were sitting in the office with a couple of program directors, and we said, they came walking in, and I told the program directors to get out of here. So we put chairs then, and we sat there. We go, okay, let's take our medicine. I know what's going to happen. He says, he told us, they knew exactly what was going on. Okay, that we have a studio in Tarzana. They even knew it was in Tarzana. So there was some insider that squealed on us. God, informants, no loyalty sometimes. So they said, in lieu of everything that's happening, we're going to let you go. Okay, we're going to have to lay you off because we don't want you to be taking your students. I said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to use our positions to tell your students we're moving over there. Come with us. I mean, that's not ethical. I mean, I owe a lot to you. I looked at Pat Johnson and Chuck Norris. I owe a lot to you guys, and I wouldn't do that to you. Okay. But then they said, but you're not going to tell the students that want to come not to come. And I said, well, they have to do what they have to do. So no, I didn't take all the files and copy them. I did not do that. I wasn't going to do that. I could have, but I didn't. As it turned out, only about 20 or 30 students came. That's okay. Right. You know who one of my first students was at Tarzana? Gary Witkowski.
Yep.
And he wasn't from Norris. He was working in the Capri Plaza. So he was walking by while we were constructing a lot, and he said, I'm going to be your first student. And sure enough, he was. So because of that, we were cut off. They laid us off. We collected unemployment, and we opened up our studio over there. So our relationship was, needless to say, strained. Right. I didn't see Chuck Norris for about a year after that, and then after a year, my partnership with Harold Gross only lasted about a year because I couldn't take him. He wanted to just sit there and play guitar. He'd sit there in his street clothes and play guitar. Class is going to start in 5 minutes. All the students are out on the mat. He's sitting there playing guitar. I said, Harold, your class is going to start in 5 minutes. He goes, I'll be there. And a minute before, he quickly goes, changes into his tovak, and he goes out there. And then he comes to me and he says, I want you to teach more classes. I went, what? I said, we had a partnership that I did sales and pay bills, and you teach the classes, and I'll do the day classes. Oh no, he wanted me to teach as many classes as him. I said, what are you going to do? I almost said, you going to play guitar? I didn't say that. He wanted to do more administration. He knows jack about administration, and he's not good at it anyhow. I've seen him try to sell somebody something. Forget it. So after a while, I said, Harold, I want a divorce. He went, what? I go, I don't want to be your partner anymore. So we decided we bought the Sherman Oaks studio from Pat Johnson because Pat Johnson was going to go off and be a stunt choreographer, which was good for him. So we had Sherman Oaks and we had Tarzana. And so I said, Harold, you take Sherman Oaks, I'll take Tarzana, and we'll call it a clean break. Okay, fine. He sold it to Bernie Krasno, Pops. Did you
Okay.
ever meet
All
him?
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ron
totally.
Ponnell's guy, right? Ron Ponnell was head instructor over there. And I had Rick Oakey teaching with me over at Tarzana.
Uh-huh.
So that's how that. And then Chuck Norris came to me. He wanted to meet with me. Like, okay. He always comes with somebody. He never comes alone. One of his workout people, he comes with me. And he sits down and he says, I'd like you to join my organization, the National Tang Soo Congress. I go, okay, great. I would love to do that, Mr. Norris. And he says, oh, come on. I'm Chuck. He doesn't like Mr. Norris. I go, okay, Chuck. He says, I said, okay, what is it going to cost me? Because I knew there was some reason why he just didn't want to come face-to-face meeting. So he says, I just want a percentage of test fees. And I just had started my own business. And I said, you know what, Chuck, I cannot afford to give you a penny because every dime goes into operations and salaries and stuff like that. I said, but we'll be your most loyal students. If you just take us, we'll follow you blindly into anything you want to do because that's how much we care about you. He says, I can't do that. Everybody that's joined with me is paying their share of test fees. So we parted cordially. He understood, shook hands, and that's the last I've seen him to this day. To this day. I mean, he sent my regards through you and through Gary East, saw him at a book signing and things like that, but I've never face-to-face. Last year's convention, 2 years ago, whenever the last convention was, I saw him real close on the stage, but I never got a chance to get close to him and say hello.
Right. One day we'll make that happen.
I hope he stays lucid enough, because Pat Johnson is having his dementia issues, and I hope Chuck Norris. He looks like he had a hard time up there talking. I know.
Well, that was a lot of clarification for me because I never really. I never knew that Harold Gross went over and took over the Sherman Oaks School, and that was kind of part of your group.
Right.
So that is the original. Original, yeah. But Pops bought that school and then took over. Now you mentioned Ron Ponnell. Ron Ponnell is your 5th black belt, I think.
My third.
Third. I'm sorry.
Right.
So how did he was over there with Harold Gross, and how did he get his black belt from you? How did that work?
He got our black belt when we were still one group, one studio.
Okay.
Two studios, but he got our black. He was training with Bob Osmond right across the street from the Tarzana studio. He was a green belt, and he'd come over. I think he knew Harold from something, or he just came walking over because he was a friendly type guy, and we invited him to spar with us, and he wasn't all that great. He had good technique, but he didn't know anything about sparring. He just kind of threw kicks and punches, and Harold would just take him apart, and Ron would be in awe of that. So when John Atkinson, his instructor, closed the Bob Osmond studio across the street, I hope it wasn't because of us, but I think it was. When he closed it up, Ron came over to us as a green belt. So we said, you can keep your rank, but you got to learn our stuff. So the Shoin-ryu stuff, Isshin-ryu stuff is wonky. This one, I don't like to say bad things about styles, but that's one of the styles that I feel most uncomfortable with. Just watching him do his basics, I go, oh gosh, you're gonna have to change those. But he changed it real quick, and he got real good, real fast. And the rest, he's still very active. That guy, 60-something years old, and he's active in the tournament circuit and everything. So.
Well, I was just talking with David Srirachi on Monday, and he was talking about how Ron Ponnell kind of got him back, into competition, and doing stuff online. So I mean, hey, staying active and getting it after all these years, I think that's awesome. I think it's.
Really
cool.
It is awesome, and especially
Ron,
from Hawaii. The best thing that happened to Ron was Zoom, because he can do it from anywhere. He lives in Hawaii. He could have national Zoom tournaments with no problem.
Right. So, gosh, I didn't even realize we're almost at an hour and a half.
Yes,
and so we've talked about Tarzana, and then you went on to open Tia Westlake Karate, or at that time it was just plain old Thousand Oaks Karate. We went from the rec center to the Arbalest School to the, Westlake School. And just, I mean, I think you and I have a tie for how many times we've moved, because I've moved way too many times in less years. But, so I don't really want to go down that road. And I know Mr. Cox talked to you a little bit about that. But, as we start to wind down, what are some of the things, what are some of the memories that just really stick out to you as far as the martial arts, post Norris days and coming into the current? Your son is obviously um, a big part of your school and now your partner, and one day he may take over and continue on. Talk a little bit about just kind of right now, the current, and as we move forward into the future.
Well, this pandemic has really put a crimp in the style of almost everybody. We all are showed our resilience in being able to live through it. Living through teaching online, which is not the best. I never thought in my lifetime I'd have to be teaching a class on a screen to students who have a hard time face to face. It makes it triple hard teaching them on Zoom, but at least the students and we carried on. So, Mark Cox, I love you too. um, we lived through that. We showed our resilience, as I said, and then we lived through teaching outside, which was a little bit better, but still it was outside, and especially when there's inclement weather and we have to move, just stop class. And then now we're back inside, and now we're moving into a very positive direction. I hope that we'll get back to what they call normal again.
The old
There,
normal.
the old normal. Yes, I'm just enjoying what we have right now, and because it's only going to get better. I don't foresee it's. I better knock on wood. I don't think it's going to get worse. It can only get better. And we every day we have more and more people inquiring about starting lessons for their kids, which is very encouraging. I hope all the schools are finding that boost in new enrollment. Um, and we're not the master marketers that you are, Jason, but the people, our students refer people really well. That helps. That helps quite a bit. And I like the way the growth of the martial arts is. The only thing that I personally have trouble with, Justin and I talk about it a lot, is that I have to take my old school teaching methods and make them more modern. I can't be as hardcore with little kids as I used to. I used to be able to grab a little kid if he was whining and say, stop whining. There's no whining in karate, and make him sit down like that. I grab him and sit him down like that. And the parents would go thumbs up. That's what I want. Nowadays, if you look at a kid wrong, the parent says, oh my God, you're shaming my kid. He doesn't want to come back. I'm going, oh God. It just happened the other day. I'm going, geez. I have to bite my tongue, and I have to back off like this, and I have to do, okay, how are we going to resolve this problem? I have to pull my inner Don Barnes, for those of you who know Don Barnes. But I have to, that's one thing that it's tough to change the old school methods and make them more modern. But, to survive, we have to do that in technology, and we have to do it in teaching classes. I know, Mark, whining parents.
Well, listen, I think we can all agree. Those of us that came from your teaching, many of us, I mean, you'll still see Mr. Cox and myself do a lot of the same things, and I think that we bite our tongue the same way. We're all kind of dealing with that, but there is still a huge appreciation for old school. I think old school. Mr. Cox says it all the time. Old school is the best school, and
Right.
there's a lot about it. An example was we had a tournament at our school just about a month ago, and we were doing a competition, and I pre-framed the whole thing, and I said, guys, listen, students are going to win first place, second place, or third place, but just so you know, there are no participation awards today. And in our school, I literally had people stand up and they were clapping
Really?
because
Wow.
they appreciated it. And I think it's all about the culture. And just one of the things that you've done over the years really, really well is you've developed this culture that we have all, your karate sons have all really, and daughters have embraced that, and we still do pass it on, but it is a challenge. It is definitely a challenge, taking the old school and blending it with, let's just say, the new school, and kind of making it work. But I would say that your parents had similar challenges as well, right? And
Yes.
every generation is going to have that challenge, but what better way to bridge that gap with your son kind of being there to balance you out? Because I look at it too. I have young guys that run classes, and I think they run the classes better than I do. I think they
Yes,
do things
exactly. exactly.
and it's a balance. It's a really good balance.
Mhm.
So what do you see, we always ask this in meetings, what do you see for the future of the American Tang Soo Do Alliance? What do you see for the future of, just Tang Soo Do, traditional Tang Soo Do as we teach it, going into the future?
Well, at the end, as this pandemic winds down to a close, I'd like to go back. We were rolling before the pandemic. I mean, we had fight nights and we had tournaments and we had convention once a year, and those are feel good feelings. I miss seeing all of you guys, all your people, all together in one group. Instead of having to travel to individual tests, we got having a convention with everybody there, having a fight night with the fighters there, having tournaments. We got a new tournament format that I really liked with the forms eliminations. I mean, it really made things so much more interesting, and things are, and all of a sudden, bam, this virus hits, and it kind of. But I want to bring it back. I want to get it back up so our alliance becomes active again.
I'm looking forward to that. I think we all are. There's so many people in our group that now, I mean, besides Mr. Cox and I think there's very few that are active that are directly under you. There's many more that are kind of, Mr. Cox has several schools under
Right,
him, and we've got, my brother, and it's just it's kind of weird in a way too for me, because I remember looking at um, all of these people, and I was just kind of down here. But
right, right.
I would look forward to revisiting that and having some more interaction. I think the convention was probably one of the best things that we ever did. It was one of my favorite things. Second to that would be the martial arts ballet. I know it only
Oh,
ran
boy.
for a couple of years, but I
Oh,
have
that
some of the.
takes. You know why? That takes so much preparation.
I
That
know.
takes the most. We don't have to prepare for all the other things, but
Right.
this one, oh my gosh. The last one Justin produced, oh, that was just a work of art he did.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun, but it was a great way. I think it was a great way for us to bring us together and still allow everybody to have their different methods and their different ways of doing
Right.
testing or doing their curriculum or running their schools. But at the end of the day, Mr. Chikawa, you know this, and I'm gonna just reiterate what Mr. Cox always says is that you're the hub of everything for us, right? Because without you, I think the alliance just completely falls apart. I think that you are the hub. You're now the great grandpa. Because my students, by the way, that my students told me the other day, I said I'm kind of like your karate dad. They're like, no, you're kind of like grandpa. And
Oh boy, how'd
Mr.
that
Phil
make you
Garris,
feel?
uh, really good for a second, and then after I thought about it, not so good. But I just, again, at the end of this, the whole reason that I did these videos, by the way, is to highlight people. And that's what it's all about. Is I just wanted to let people share their story, because I talk about you a lot. I talk about a lot of the guests that I have on the show a lot, and it's really important for me when I set out my goals for 2021. And I looked back at years past, and I said, there's so many people that have motivated me, inspired me, and been a part. And you know, in the top three or four, you're like you're in there. My dad, my grandpa are the ones that really shaped me as a man, but you shaped me as a martial artist, and you shaped me as an instructor. And without you, I would not have found the passion for martial arts. Number one, I would not have found the passion to become an instructor, let alone own a school, which I had zero understanding of business or anything else prior to that. And it really goes back a long way. I mean, people don't realize that our relationship started in 1985, when I first started as a 10-year-old kid. And the story is not about me, but I'm sure you could tell a lot of stories about how I grew up and how hopefully I've changed quite a bit. But you are responsible for a lot of people. And Bill Cormany is just saying that he was honored that you were at his test. We talked about it this past test, about how the traditions and everything else. I want to just make sure that you know that I'm continuing that, and no
Good.
matter how long or how far. you are always one of my greatest mentors. So I
Oh,
truly
thank you
truly
very much.
appreciate you, and I love you like my karate dad, just like Mr. Cox. So
Right.
thank you so much for
You're
everything. I
welcome
really
so
do
much. I
appreciate it.
appreciate everything you do, Jason.
Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you're watching this later, you may be breaking it up into smaller parts. This has been my longest interview ever, and appropriately so, because probably one of the most influential people in my life has been interviewed today. So, Mr. Ichikawa, thank you for sharing your story, and
You're
I look
welcome.
forward to seeing you soon again.
Okay.
All right, have a
Bye.
great day. Talk to you
Okay, you
soon.
too.
All right, bye guys. We'll close it out with the video, and please share this video so everybody can hear Mr. Ichikawa's story. Have a great day, guys.